Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar of the 2021 EMOS Webinars program. My name is Caterina Giusti. I'm Professor of Statistics at the University of Pisa in Italy, where this session is hosted. And today I will also act as the webinar facilitator. Now, let me first explain for any newcomers that EMOS stands for the European Master in Official Statistics, a joint project of universities and data producers in the EU member states, EFTA, and EU candidate countries. If your university is interested in applying for the EMOS label, please consider that a permanently open call for universities is available on the EMOS dedicated page on the Eurostat website. For staying in contact with the EMOS news and community, please follow the EMOS Twitter account. It is at EU_EMOS. It's now time to start with our webinar. Before I give the floor to our speakers, let me first briefly explain how we run the webinar today. This year, the EMOS webinar stream on the EMOS YouTube channel, where you can already find the recording of the past webinars. As a participant, you can watch and listen to the webinar. To use the chat to interact with the presenters, you need to log in YouTube using a Google account. We encourage you to prepare your questions and pose them to the presenters during the presentation or the question break or the final discussion. Should you have any technical problem or question, you can send us an email. We will indicate the email you can use in the chat. We are now ready to start. Today, I have the great pleasure to host two speakers, Daniele Vignoli and Eleonora Meli. Daniele Vignoli is full professor of demography at the University of Florence. He is co-director of the Florence Population Studies Center between the University of Florence and the European University Institute. Currently, he leads the ERC Consolidator Grant on Economic Uncertainty and Fertility in Europe and the grant on the Great Demographic Recession, financed by the Italian Ministry of Education, University and Research. Daniele's research interests address social demography, family demography, and life course. Eleonora Meli is a sociologist and social researcher from ISTAT, the Italian National Institute of Statistics. She has carried out research at ISTAT since 2001 in the field of social statistics, especially in the context of multipurpose household surveys. She is in charge of the survey on families, social subjects, and life cycle. Her research project explores several family-related issues. Today, Daniele and Eleonora will present about detecting family complexity from official statistics. So, Daniele, the floor now is yours for the first part.
Can I start?
Yes,
okay.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. First of all, let me thank also this year the organizers of this webinar series for having invited us. This is a joint presentation with Eleonora Meli from ISTAT, as Caterina anticipated already. Thank you for the possibility to share with you some reflections about how official statistics is currently doing in detecting and documenting the rising family complexity that contemporary European and also out of Europe wealthy society are doing. And we take Italy as a case study because Italy, from an international perspective, is extremely interesting because it has been all too often depicted as a traditional country. This is how Eleonora and I divided the presentation. I will first review with you mega trends in cohabitation, non-marital childbearing, union dissolution, living apart together relations, and multi-partner fertility, with a specific focus on Italy. So from my point of view, with this review, I will pose a series of challenges about family change that then Eleonora will address. Eleonora will answer from the official statistics point of view, how can we detect new family trends and how we can understand these new family trends in Italy. And the starting point of the presentation is the recognition that in Western societies, the centrality of marriage is declining, being more and more often replaced replaced by support for more liberal demographic behaviors such as divorce, cohabitation, and non-marital childbearing. These new demographic behaviors are often viewed as a progressive independence of individuals who give growing importance to self-realization and their psychological well-being and to their personal freedom of expression. The rise of individualism and secularization has led to a shift in the moral code, enabling major changes in family behaviors. And let me start the overview talking about marriage. This graph shows you for OECD countries from the OECD Family Database, the marriage per 1,000 individuals in 1995, 1970, and 2017. Marriage rates, as you can see, differ considerably across OECD countries. In some countries, including Luxembourg and Italy, crude marriage rates are very low, at fewer than 3.5 marriage per 1,000 individuals. In 1970, most OECD countries had crude marriage rates of somewhere between 7 and 10. Then, in 1995, crude marriage rates had fallen to around 5 to 7 per 1,000. And in many countries, they have continued to fall since. In yellow there, you can see Italy. Italy is one of the countries with the fastest drop among all other countries in the number of marriages. On the other side, we are also facing a divorce boom. Crude divorce rates, divorces per 1,000 individuals, also vary considerably between countries. Generally, crude divorce rates are higher now than they were in 1970, with many OECD countries, Belgium, Greece, Luxembourg, Norway, the Netherlands, having seen their crude marriage rates more than double over the period considered by this graph. Italy, again in yellow, is facing a remarkable increase in crude divorce rate from 1995 to 2017, although still being among the lowest level of crude divorce rate across countries. But the only focus on marriage and divorce only gives us a very partial overview about family change in Europe. For instance, this table shows you cohabitation, because union formation is nowadays not only reached through marriage, but also through cohabitation. And cohabitation is most often detected through surveys. This is the percentage of women who began their union with cohabitation. It's a graph, is a table based on a study by Brianna Perelli-Harris using harmonized data from the countries here illustrated. As you can see, in the period 1995-2003, in Norway, France, and Austria, basically 90% of women began their union with cohabitation, 9 women out of 10. In Italy, this value drops to 18%, 1 woman out of 5. But still, also if you look at the rise over time in Italy, from the first period considered, 1975-1984, to the last period, we moved from 4% to 18%. So it is a huge increase, actually. And this graph shows the proportion of women ever cohabited. As you can see, the rise of cohabitation is clear. Cohabitation is increasing everywhere, but there is also a great diversity between countries. On the top, you can see Norway, Austria, France, and on the bottom, the more Catholic-oriented countries. You can locate Poland and Italy. So cohabitation is rising everywhere, and as cohabitation is rising, also non-marital childbearing. Non-marital childbearing means out-of-wedlock unions that most often happen within cohabitation is also rising. On average, across OECD countries, 41% of births occur outside of marriage. In 11 countries, among which Denmark, Estonia, France, Iceland, Sweden, Norway, more than 50% of births are now out of marriage. And on the other side, on 4 countries, by contrast, less than 10% of children are born outside marriage. In yellow, you can see again Italy. And let me now focus a bit more specifically on Italy, because as I anticipated at the beginning, Italy is an extremely interesting case study from an international perspective, because Italy has been viewed for many years as a sort of clear antidote to those broad demographic trends, a society where the family has remained pivotal, intergenerational co-residence remained prevalent, and where traditional attitudes towards demographic behaviors has prevailed. Actually, with this presentation, Eleonora and I are contesting this international view of Italy, always depicted as an homogeneous family-oriented country. Things are changing also here. And this slide is a clear example of this state of affairs. Although marriage continues to be central and popular among Italian couples, data show clearly that it is no longer the unique way to form a relationship. So you can see the number of marriages. You can see that from about 600 marriages every 1,000 women registered in 2008, we are now facing less than 500 marriages in 2018. And in addition to this, is not in the graph, you have also to take into account that in parallel to the decline of marriage, a clear sign of secularization in Italy is also the rise of marriages celebrated with a non-religious ceremony, with a civil ceremony. In the 1970s, 2 out of 100 marriages were celebrated with a non-religious ceremony. Today, in 2018, more than 50% of marriages are celebrated with a non-religious ceremony. Simultaneously, non-marital unions have become popular among young Italians. 20 years ago, only 2 out of 100 couples were living in a non-marital union. Today, about 16 to more than 20% in the north of Italy, Italians choose this form of family arrangements, at least for a part of their relationship. These changes in union behaviors also clearly foster a rising percentage of out-of-wedlock childbearing. Today, more than 1/3 of children are born in Italy in non-marital unions. And the rising flexibility of union patterns are even more visible looking at marriage dissolutions. Whereas about 80 marriages out of 1,000 concluded with a divorce at the beginning of the 90s, now 300 marriages out of 1,000 are concluding in recent years with a divorce or a separation. So in Italy, that is usually seen as an antidote to these broad family changes, things change, and we are now facing revolutionary family changes clearly in the last years. Now the point is that we have to pose to our collectors of social statistics, how can we detect these changes? And let me give you 2 examples of challenges for official statistics in properly documenting family change. The first example is about LIT relations. What are LIT relations? So imagine that, and this is the case, for a long time, surveys only considered a tripartite model of family arrangements. Those who are single, those who are cohabiting in more recent years, and those who are married. And this is how very often you see the classification of family arrangements in articles also published in top-ranked journals or in reports. But this model is absolutely incomplete. First of all, being married does not necessarily mean being in couple. You can be married, but the relationship with the partner is not valid any longer. So this is what in sociology is called living together apart. But even more importantly is that living alone does not necessarily mean being in couple. Living alone does not mean having no partner. There are LIT relations, so intimate, stable relationships among partners who live in different homes. And this is a huge challenge for official statistics because the key point is being single in household terms, when you do your sampling, does not mean being single in relationship terms. These are two distinct things. And when you classify these individuals as single, you are usually making a mistake in one case out of 4. As I was saying, family is changing, and more often scholars are working on new family situations, cohabitation without marriage, second marriages, step families, same-sex couples, and so on. And within this context of increasing diversity, a key question is, do LIT relations, a new way of doing intimacy, can be a new family form, the decision of being in an intimate, stable relationship, but do not move in together? And to reply to this question, and also to understand how we can grasp LIT relations from surveys, I will make a comparison between France and Italy. For France, I'm using the French version of the Gender and Generation Survey, from 2005. The Gender and Generation Survey is a system of nationally representative surveys for many countries. And the Italian variant of the Gender and Generation Surveys that corresponds to the national, to the survey from Istat, Families and Social Subjects from 2009 and 2016. In these surveys, we can identify non-cohabiting partners through the question, are you currently in a stable, intimate relationship with someone you are not living with? So it is important in collecting data within the family roster in surveys, also taking into account this possibility. And let us look at partnership status by age group in France first, by age groups. So you can see in red the share of LIT relations. Altogether, around 8.8% of individuals are in France in an LIT relations, so they are in a stable, intimate relationship with someone they are not living with in the same household. As you can see, the share is particularly pronounced in the very young ages, 18 to 24, and then it declines with age, and then it rises again as individuals are getting older. In Italy, which is the situation in Italy, the overall share is very similar, is 9.7%, but you can immediately see a huge difference compared to France. The greatest share of LIT relations in Italy are between 25 to 34, and this is very much due to the postponement of the transition to adulthood in Italy. This is due to the fact that in Italy, young adults are staying together with their parents for many years, much longer than in France. This consideration is even more straightforward if we look at this graph. This graph indicates the proportion of young people living in the parental home by age group in France and Italy. As you can see, in France, if you take the age group 18 to 19, this share of individuals living with their parents is around 90%, but then it drops very fast. In Italy, the situation is quite diverse. As you can see, the permanence of young adults with their parents is much more delayed, is much more postponed. And altogether, so we can understand that LIT relations mean very different things in these two different societies. In France, 37% of people in LIT relationships live with their parents. In Italy, it is the great majority of individuals in an LIT relation that live with their parents. So I was focusing on LIT relations to put highlight that it is important in surveys also to collect this family situation, because LIT relations are common. 1 out of 4 individuals who are usually classified as being single, they are in reality in a relationship. But there are also very many differences between countries. In Mediterranean countries, Italy, but also Spain, LIT are popular in the early phases of the life course and often linked to difficult labor and housing market. So in the end, in Italy, LIT relations are not this new family model. They are not different than the old-fashioned dating arrangement. But in continental countries or Nordic countries, LIT may be seen as an alternative to other forms of living as a couple, especially in the older phases of the life course, after a divorce or after the death of a partner. So you may decide to stay in a relationship, but without moving in together. And I'm also giving you one final example of another family change that official statistics absolutely need to investigate and monitor, and it is related to the post-separation family life. Because in all European societies, the separation has become a common life course event. And growing attention has been given to the question how family behavior develops after union dissolution. Within union dissolution, a growing share of couples with minor children separate, and separated parents may repartner and have further children. So the experience of having children with more than one partner is becoming more and more common. This is what is called in the international literature MultiPartner Fertility, so having children with different partners. This poses challenges for collectors of social statistics because we need to identify the correct parent, and we need to study the process of childbearing across partnerships or multi-partner fertility. Usually there are two possibilities: a direct approach, so asking directly to individuals whether they have had children all with the same partner, or an indirect approach, using the histories of fertility histories, partnership histories, marital histories to estimate the prevalence of multi-partner fertility. And this is what we have done for the first time in Italy, using one important source of data that Eleonora will then present you, which is Family and Social Subjects survey for 2009 and 2016. And we indirectly estimated the prevalence of multi-partner fertility by looking at all the episodes of union, formation and dissolution, and all the episodes of having children. This graph indicates the proportion of the prevalence of multi-partner fertility among individuals among mothers who have more than 2 children for several countries. These are estimations made by Elizabeth Thompson and colleagues in 2020 using harmonized surveys for these countries. As you can see, in the US, the prevalence is huge. 35% of those who have more than 2 children, they have had these children with different partners. So let me then the share declines, and let me add Italy here. So we are the country with the lowest prevalence of multi-partner fertility. It is about 4%. 4% of individuals who had more than one child, they had these children with different partners. You may think is low. We can discuss this later, whether this is really low, but it is a group which is sociologically and demographically interesting. This actually corresponds to more than 800 individuals that deserves attention. Because multi-partner fertility, we know now very clearly from the literature, represents an additional process through which children with less advantaged background obtain less opportunities and resources compared to their more privileged counterparts. Multi-partner fertility is very often associated with negative outcomes for children, and the socioeconomic disadvantage of families involved in the process of multi-partner fertility do even appear strikingly similar across societies. There is a disadvantage for children experiencing this kind of family processes, including countries with more generous welfare regimes. And I was just focusing on these two examples, or more examples: cohabitation, non-marital childbearing, LIT relations, multi-partner fertility, but the same attention should be deserved to single-parent families, grey divorces, voluntary union dissolutions after the age of 50, and LGBT families. So, my conclusion is that European families have undergone substantial changes since the 1960s, resulting in relatively high levels of diversity, complexity, and instability across multiple domains of family life. So the structure of families and family processes is changing dramatically over time, with implications for children, parents, service providers, and also collectors of social statistics. So accordingly, a major challenge for official statistics today has become to accurately identifying and describing contemporary families. That is, documenting this complexity. We need to document and understand this complexity. So from the research side, I stop here. Now let's see how official statistics is reacting to this kind of questions. I'm, of course, available for midterm questions at the end. Alternatively, with Eleonora, we can address your questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Daniele. So you have said everything. I think we have a question. Thank you for the very interesting talk on contemporary families. Does your analysis complement the analysis of the fertility of?
Sure. So I reply now as you. I reply
as you prefer, Daniele.
We are living in a time in which fertility is unexpectedly declining everywhere. We were used to think that fertility was low in Mediterranean countries, while fertility is high in Nordic countries, but now the drop in fertility in Finland, in Denmark, in Sweden is absolutely comparable in relative terms to the drop of fertility in Greece after its economy collapsed. So to study fertility, especially in a comparative perspective, we need to study fertility irrespective of whether fertility is in marriage or in cohabitation. And the point is that in countries where non-marital childbearing has been common for many years, the sort of drop of fertility within marriage has been counterbalanced by a rise in fertility within cohabitation. In Mediterranean countries, the point is that the drop in fertility, at least until some years ago, the drop in fertility within marriage has not been counterbalanced by a substantial increase in fertility within cohabitation. But also from this point of view, things are changing extremely rapidly now.
Okay, thank you, Daniele. I don't see for the moment any questions, but of course, the audience can continue and pose questions in the chat. So now I would give the floor to Eleonora for the second part. And then, of course, we will have a final discussion also at the end. So, Eleonora, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Caterina. Thank you, Daniele. Thank you for introducing me. And okay, here are my slides. And this second part of the presentation is about how official statistics can disentangle complexity, or better say, how official statistics can offer some information to investigate family complexity, and how official sources can examine all the issues that are linked in at the themes that Daniele already told us in the first part. And now I provide some data that can help this discussion. Italian National Institute of Statistics offer a wide range of statistics that gather information both using sampled surveys or registers. Both these sources are very useful for social researchers. On one side, thanks to sample surveys, it is possible to analyze in depth reasons, intentions, past events of the interviews. And on the other side, considering that sample surveys are not exhaustive and that they are carried out with a defined frequency, every year, every 5 years, or occasionally, register can fill the gap, providing continuous information and in a more continuous way. The issue that we can just a moment, I lose my presentation. Okay.
Yes, we can see the slide, but it's not full screen, Eleonora.
No.
No, it's
okay.
the first slide, but it is not.
Yes. No.
No, for the moment. Or you can maybe stop sharing and start again.
And start again.
Yeah.
Okay. I share it again. Share screen. Okay.
Okay.
Now
we can see you're not full screen yet, but otherwise you can just.
I see it as full screen.
Okay, so let's try. If you move to the second one.
Can you see the slide, the next slide I'm going on?
No.
No. So you stay in the first slide. You cannot see the others.
No. So maybe we can try to move again, please. Okay. Or
yes.
Move.
I'll share it again, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it's a break, don't worry.
Tell me if you can see.
The same, but please try to move in the index of the slide that you have on the left. If you go on the second one.
Yes, I'm on the second one. The third?
No. So maybe you can. Oh, okay, now yes. Okay, no, so please go back. We are in the third one now. Okay, so it's just maybe a little slow, but it's okay.
Okay. So, okay, here we are. Okay, this is the index, right?
You can see the sources.
Okay, Perfect. The index is simply the list of issues that I'll show you here in this presentation that Daniele already have exposed to you. And the starting point of this part of the presentation is considering the differences between the different sources as an enrichment, as we can use different sources in different ways, but in a complementary way. So in social analysis, the background, for example, can be done using registers. This data gives give an overview of the phenomenon, especially in terms of time series. Then, if we need to interpret it, we may need some different source, for example, some survey that gives us information more in depth. But not for every issue we have this disponibility. We have several sources. Sometimes we have only one source, and we have to analyze our topic using only one source. But let's see how we can use these sources and which are the sources that I'll show you here and which I used to enrich, to enlarge our point of view about these issues. The first one is obviously families, social subject and life cycle, that from now on I call in a quickest way FSS. This is a sample survey, and it is our rich data for retrospective histories in terms of unions, fertility and employment. So we use this source in very different ways to detect how interviews life has changed over time, okay? Asking in a retrospective way. Another very important source that is a sample survey, it is aspects of daily life. This is an annual survey. It gives us classification for the families in an annual comparison. So we have a very long time series, and it is also the official source for household classification. And another very interesting sample survey, it's the survey on birth that was carried out in 2002 and 2005. It has collected data from interviewing a sample of first-time moms, and it gives us a lot of information about pregnancy and sharing of duties in the couples, aids received from the couples after the childbearing, and so on. Then we pass to the registers sources, and here we have marriages, separation and divorces. These are different sources. For the separation and divorce, for example, we have the civil courts, and then the biggest, the huge database of population in Italy, that is resident municipal population register, that gives us a very small amount of variables of interest, but it is linked to all the population. So all this information are about age, sex, and marital status, but are the exhaustivity of this register that is very useful for our studies.
Sorry, Eleonora, I have to stop you because actually we are still stuck to the sources slide. So could you just please check? We send you the presentation in PDF, so maybe you can stop sharing and try with the PDF. Let's do, because of course everything was working in the, don't worry, it was working when we tested this, but maybe with the PDF it's better.
Okay. I'm downloading, just a moment. Okay. Share again. Okay, here is PDF.
Okay, good. Now we can see. Okay.
Okay. It was just a quick list of sources and some point of interest for each source. But now it's the real point of the of the presentation. So how we can use different sources in analyzing these issues, that we can consider the main characteristic of the complexity of the family. So starting, as Daniele did, talking about cohabitation, I'm just going, I go on. If you can see, just say me. Talking about cohabitation, we can see on the left side of this slide, and it will be every time the structure of this presentation. On the left side, one source, and on the right side, FSS data. So on the left side, we see how we can analyze cohabitation using aspects of daily life data, and how this graph shows us the increase of unmarried couple in the population. But this is not the point. This is already Daniele talked about this to us. And in the other side, we see something different. We see, first of all, people, not couples. People who have experienced a cohabitation, and thanks to what I said before, is the strength point of the FSS survey, the retrospective history on unions allow us to have an idea of how many people have experienced a cohabitation that is different from current cohabitation, because we know that in many cases cohabitation were turned into marriages. That's because there is still an idea in Italy that cohabitation is not a stable way of forming a union. So many cohabitation turns into a marriage. Most of all after the first child arrival, and as you can see here, there is this 8.1% of people who had had a cohabitation and then turned their cohabitation into a marriage. And there's another information that we cannot have from aspects of daily life, that are the previous cohabitation, because we know that there is an instability in unions, also in cohabitation, more than in cohabitation and in marriages. And here we can analyze how many cohabitation dissolves and the characteristics of this cohabitation of the individuals. Actually, of the individuals who cohabit or who have experienced cohabitation. And here there is an example what we can do with FSS data. And there are some interesting socio-demographic characteristics, but not only. We can see in the in this graph the parents ESEC. What's parents ESEC? It's the social class of origin. ESEC is a classification, an international classification of employment. In this case, the parental employment at the age of 15 of the interviews, that can give us information of the social, cultural, and economical, as a proxy, background of the interviews. And we can see how these characteristics of the individuals or its background differs in the form of cohabitation they have experienced or they are experiencing. Then, talking about a different form of relation and adding some information to what Danielle already said, we have the living apart together relation. This kind of relationship are not detected by other sources. I explain it better. We have, for example, in aspect of daily life, information about one-person families. And we know that the share of this kind of families are more and more common, and this share is increasing in time, but we don't know if these are single person or not, as we have already said and Daniele perfectly explained it before. Single is not one person family. One person family is a way to say that someone is living alone, but we really don't know if that person is in a relationship or not. Well, we know thanks to data that we collect in FSS survey. And as we have seen before, also for people who are in LIT, we have some information about some socio-demographic characteristics. And just to give you an idea of how many people we are talking about, we are talking about nearly 5 million of people that are currently in an LIT relationship. Very interesting is the age of these people for many reasons. For the main reason that Daniele already explained in the first part of this presentation, because it's another step that have been postponed. This phase of engagement, it's a phase that could be lived in the first years of adulthood or in the young phase of life. Instead, we have a lot of people who is still in a LIT relation, even if they have from 20 to 34 years old. They are in the middle of their reproductive life. They are in the middle of their life in terms of union formation, but they are not still in this phase of their life. They are a step beyond, a step before this, leaving the parental home, and they are still in a not living relation. But there is another group of people who is in this condition, that are people 45 and over, who are in a relationship without living with their partner, and the characteristics of this group are very different from the first one, the younger one. And as we can see is the orange bars of this graph, they are separated or divorced, and they have at least one child, more than the younger part of this collective of people who is in a relationship without living in. This is a really interesting consideration in terms of what we are saying when we talk about single families. Instead, I say we will talk about one-person families. Another of the topic that Daniele showed us is non-marital childbearing. Our first source, every time on the left side of the slide, is the population register that gives us the number of live births for each year. And it collects individuals and total live births resident in the municipality, but also contains information about newborns, mother, fathers, and also about the family. We have a long time series here. There is the time series that starts from 2008, but the time series available from 1999. But we have a second source of this issue, that is FSS, as usual. We can look at the union in this case and observe is the relationship after the birth of the first child has turned into marriage, as we see before about cohabitation, and some of the socio-demographic characteristics of the parents. Okay, so this is one of the just to give a first glance at the phenomenon, and then we can go in depth analyzing the history of unions and fertility and look at what happened after the childbirth. Another big issue in this time of very low fertility, it's the group of people who are childless. We have from the population register the share of women by birth cohort and child number on the left side, and so we can see that the women's share increases by birth cohort, reaching 22.6% for the 1979 cohort. And enlarging our point of view, we can consider in the analysis both gender and also the reason interviews gave to be childless. And this is possible thanks to data from FSS. Okay, that provides the share of men and women childless and the reason they say to be childless, to give us, to don't want a child. And we can see that quite 1 out of 3 individuals aged 18 and more are childless. Only 5% don't want to have children. These are 2.8 million of people, with a slight advantage for men. And most interesting is looking at the reason they gave to remain childless. because policies in support of fertility should be aware of the obstacles that individuals find in their reproductive life. So if we see that between 25 and 35 and 34 years old, quite 1 out of 4% of people have economic, working, or housing conditions that not allow them to have children. This is something that policies should take in account. But going a little bit further and to the last slide, because I go very long in this presentation. The great divorces, on one side we have the data from civil courts, and on the right side data from FSS, considering not only divorces but all dissolution in all these extensions in terms of marriages and cohabitation dissolution. And here we have the pie charts by ages. And then a table that shows us how this change in terms of some socio-demographic characteristic, but also in terms of probability to enter in a second union. So the share of people who dissolved first union that enter in a second union, and which kind of union was dissolved and which kind of union they are entering in. And just to conclude, this is my last slide. I would say in conclusion that family complexity offers many challenges to official statistics, and the information we collect can disentangle this complexity. Sometimes we need register, maybe because we need a long time series, and sometimes we need sample survey data in order to know what's beyond an emergent behavior. Thank you very much, and I'm really sorry for the problems during the presentation in the screen.
It's okay. I think I already indicated in the chat the link where, in any case, the slides can be downloaded. So yes, don't worry, I think about that. So we have time for some questions at the end. Okay, we have also Daniele. We have a question from Joao that was actually to Daniele, but then he also added this question can go to Eleonora also. So there is a social phenomenon called co-parenting, two adults parenting the same kid without having a relationship between themselves. Do you know how prevalent it is?
I don't know how prevalent it is. I know that there is some research on this phenomenon, in the sense that this is the idea of family complexities within the broad umbrella of family complexity. I know that there are websites with many subscriptions, but this does not tell us anything about the prevalence. And there are also many opportunistic samples or convenience samples made by research in social psychology about co-parenting. But what we have to be aware of is that with these opportunistic samples, you are not able to do any estimates about the prevalence, and also the correlates that you can find with statistical models are only characterized by strong internal validity, but cannot be generalized in any way. So from this point of view, we do need the national statistical offices that take into account that we need to estimate also these new challenges for family and these new family situations. So I don't know the prevalence, probably because there is no official statistics about that, but this is what we need, official statistics and not convenience samples by homemade samples, let's say.
Okay, thank you, Daniele. So let's see if we have other questions. So I have just a curiosity. Eleonora, do you think that something new is going to happen in collecting this data, some new kind of surveys also? I don't know.
Yes, of course. We have on the field just in these days the LGBT survey. So we are collecting data on same-sex couples, and obviously from 2016, that is the year of the Union Civil formalization by law. The civil register has data on civil union. So.
Okay, so maybe new information will be available soon. Okay, so let's see if we have other questions from the audience. I think it's very interesting and challenging, all these topics. Yeah, doesn't seem. So maybe we can conclude. Let's wait just 1 minute. It's out. Okay, so I would say that we can close here. Of course, the slides are already uploaded on the website, and of course also your email address. So if the audience would like to contact you again with many questions, of course they have the opportunity. So for today, I will thank you, Daniele and Eleonora, for this very interesting presentation. Of course, I would like to also thank all our participants who join us today from many different countries. So as I said, the presentation is already available on the EMOS 2020 events website. The link is in the chat. And the recording of the webinar will be available soon on this YouTube channel. In the meantime, I ask you to check the inbox of the email account that you use for registering to the webinar, as you have already received, or you are going to receive very shortly, the link to a short survey about today's webinar. We really appreciate your feedback to further improve our webinars. And the next webinar is scheduled in 2 weeks on Tuesday, 27th of April, when Pamela Campanelli from the Survey Coach will be presenting on cognitive interviewing for testing survey questions. So I thank you everyone again, and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.